There's a moment in every quarterback competition when the outcome stops being uncertain. It doesn't happen on a depth chart. It doesn't happen in a press release. It happens in a room that cameras never enter, between coaches who have already seen enough, who have already had the conversations that matter, and who are now simply waiting for the right moment to make it official for the rest of the world. The competition doesn't end with an announcement, it ends with a feeling that settles across an entire building, quiet, inevitable, and impossible to fake. The question is, how do you know when that moment has arrived from the outside? You learn to listen differently, not to what coaches say, but to how they say it. The pauses, the word choices, the way a specific player's name gets handled in comparison to another's, the details that appear when a coach genuinely believes in someone, and the uncomfortable absence of those details when they don't. Todd Monken sat down for a live broadcast recently and said every appropriate thing a head coach is supposed to say about an open quarterback competition. He checked every box. He was careful, measured, and professionally neutral in all the right places. But if you knew exactly where to look, he told you everything. And what he told you leads to one conclusion. Shedeur Sanders is the starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. The league just hasn't been... Let's start where Monken least wanted anyone to start, with Dillon Gabriel. When Gabriel came up, something interesting happened. The language changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that a casual viewer would immediately catch, but for anyone who has spent enough time studying how coaches communicate, it was unmistakable. Think about the way coaches talk about players they genuinely believe in. They get specific. They reference something that happened last Tuesday during a team period. They mention a throw on a particular route concept that caught their attention. They bring up a film session moment where the player identified something that veterans miss. That level of detail isn't accidental. It's the natural language of a coach who wants you to understand that this player is part of their future, that the investment is real, and that the belief is earned. None of that existed when Gabriel's name came up. What replaced it was flat, technically professional, carefully neutral in the particular way coaches are trained to speak when they've already resolved a situation internally but can't yet address it publicly. Gabriel wasn't discussed as a legitimate competitor still fighting for a starting job. He was discussed the way coaches discuss a player in the final stages of a roster decision, valued in the way all human beings deserve to be valued, but positioned in language that anyone fluent in NFL speak would recognize immediately. His time in that building is winding down. Not because he failed spectacularly, not because he's without talent, but because the organization has mentally moved past the question of whether he's their answer, and coaches stop devoting emotional energy to development stories they've already concluded. In the NFL, when a head coach stops telling your story with investment, that's when the trade conversations start happening. They may not be public yet, but they're happening. And here's why that detail matters beyond just Gabriel's future. His presence in that quarterback room was creating a specific kind of friction, not the productive friction that pushes players to be better, the other kind, the low-level daily tension that comes from competing narratives, competing frustrations, in three people sharing a space that can only truly belong to one of them. When that friction leaves, the room breathes differently, the psychological climate shifts. What remains is clarity. One job, two quarterbacks, and a competition that can finally be what it was always supposed to be. Now let's talk about Deshaun Watson, because this is the section of that broadcast that deserves the most careful analysis. Monken was meticulous here in a way that revealed just how much thought went into every single word before he spoke it. He said everything he was supposed to say about Watson. He acknowledged the football expertise. He talked about the genuine value of having an experienced, battle-tested presence in the quarterback room. He gave Watson the respect that someone who has operated at that level of professional football absolutely deserves. All of that was real. None of it was hollow. But something else was also present, woven carefully through every sentence, and if you understand how coaches navigate delicate roster situations, you couldn't miss it.
There was no assurance that Watson could be counted on for a full NFL season. It wasn't stated explicitly. Monken is far too professional to make that kind of direct declaration about a player still on his roster. But the framing told the story that the words refused to tell. Watson was never positioned as the obvious, reliable solution for 17 regular season games and a playoff run. The language around his role was careful, in the specific way language gets careful when physical uncertainty is real and the people making decisions are no longer willing to ignore it. Here's the unvarnished reality. Watson has played 19 games across the last 5 years. Not 19 poor games, 19 games, period. For a coaching staff attempting to build and execute a sophisticated offensive system, that number represents a mathematical problem that no amount of talent or experience can solve. You cannot install a complex offensive scheme around a quarterback whose availability is genuinely uncertain. You cannot build the kind of quarterback-receiver chemistry that takes months of repetitions to develop, if those repetitions might disappear at any moment. You cannot ask an entire offense to orient itself around a player and then explain to that offense in November why everything has to change. Monken knows this math. The front office knows this math. And the way Watson was discussed, valued, respected, but gently and unmistakably moved away from the role of franchise-carrying starter, confirmed that the organization has already done the calculation and arrived at the only conclusion available to them. Watson's value to this Cleveland team going forward is real. It just belongs to a different category than the one it occupied when he first arrived. Experienced backup, sideline resource, the veteran presence in the room that a young starting quarterback needs more than almost anything. Someone who has already been through the fire, who has already managed a game when everything around him was falling apart, who can sit next to Shedeur between series and offer something that no amount of film study can fully replicate. Every defensive read, every situational adjustment, the weight of what it actually feels like to run an NFL offense under genuine pressure. If Watson accepts that role with genuine investment, and reports suggest the right conversation has already happened and the right answer was given, Cleveland has put together one of the better backup situations in the league. The final piece of uncertainty around his role appears to be resolved, which means everything else has been resolved too. Remove Gabriel from the equation, reposition Watson as the veteran backup. What's left standing at the top of that depth chart isn't a surprise to anyone who has been paying close attention since the moment Shedeur Sanders walked into that building. What's left is him. And here's what the competition actually looked like from the inside, because the public narrative around Shedeur has been chaotic enough that it's worth cutting through all of it to describe exactly what was happening underneath. He didn't win this job because everyone around him failed. He didn't win it because the coaching staff ran out of other options. He didn't win it because of his father, his draft position, or his social media presence, or any of the external noise that followed him every step of the way through this offseason. He won it in the same way that quarterbacks consistently win jobs that aren't simply handed to them, by being present, by putting the work in without announcement, and by managing every uncomfortable circumstance with a level of maturity that communicated something to the coaching staff that no throw in a controlled walkthrough setting ever could. He told them he could handle what was coming, not with words. Quarterbacks say things with words constantly, and coaches learned very quickly to stop listening to words and start watching behavior under actual pressure. Shedeur told them through the way he responded when Gabriel's competitive fire was pushing at him from one direction, and Watson's veteran experience was reminding the room of what it felt like to have an established presence there. He told them through the way he showed up on days when the circumstances gave him every excuse not to. He told them through the poise he displayed when the narrative surrounding him, and there were many, and they were relentless, attempted to knock him off the foundation he was quietly constructing underneath himself. For a coaching staff evaluating a young quarterback, there was one message that matters more than mobility, more than arm strength, more than the capacity to make a throw look effortless in a scripted setting. That message is, when this season gets hard, and it will get hard because every NFL season gets hard, I will not be your problem, I will be your solution. Shedeur delivered that message across an entire offseason,
Monken received it, and the broadcast confirmed it had landed. Now let's talk about what Cleveland has constructed around him, because the environment Shedeur is stepping into is genuinely one of the better developmental situations for a young quarterback that the NFL has assembled in years, and it matters significantly for understanding what this team can actually become. Start with Spencer Fano.
Selecting Fano 9th overall wasn't a positional filler. It was an organizational declaration. You do not spend a top 10 pick on an offensive tackle unless you are fully committed to the quarterback you are protecting. That's the unspoken logic of every major offensive line investment. It's only worth that price if the player receiving the protection is worth that price. Fano brings fast feet, natural balance in the football intelligence to navigate complex pass rush games without being exposed. Qualities he demonstrated across hundreds of evaluated college reps while giving up almost nothing in pass protection. What that gives Shedeur is something that young quarterbacks almost never receive and desperately need: consistent time, real time in the pocket. Not scramble or die time, not panic throw time. The kind of time that allows a quarterback's eyes to move through a progression naturally, to identify a second or third read before pressure forces the decision, and to build the kind of in-game confidence that compounds over the course of a season, instead of being bled away snap by an offensive line that can't hold. KC Conception adds another layer: a route runner built to operate against tight man coverage, the coverage that young quarterbacks historically struggle most to attack with consistency. When a receiver wins against defenders who are pressing at the line, and a quarterback can quickly identify that the coverage has been beaten before the play fully develops, what results is an efficiency that defensive coordinators actually have to account for on every single snap. They can't just lock Conception down and dare Shedeur to beat them elsewhere. They have to respect it. And on the outside, Denzel Boston creates an entirely different problem before the ball even leaves the quarterback's hand. Size, contested catchability, red zone dominance, coverage decisions that defenses have to make at the line, which opens space elsewhere and simplifies reads for a quarterback still building his NFL timing and rhythm. Behind all of it sits a defense that finished among the top 5 in the league the previous season and hasn't given back what made it elite. A defense that creates short fields, that keeps games manageable, that allows a young quarterback to operate with positive game scripts instead of spending the fourth quarter desperately chasing a deficit with an offense that wasn't built for that situation. The kind of defensive foundation that has historically been the difference between a young quarterback's first season being a growth experience and it being something that leaves damage the organization spends years trying to reverse. The total picture is this: Shedeur Sanders is not being asked to carry Cleveland by himself. He's being placed inside a system specifically designed to make him successful while he develops, protected up front, armed with weapons that win in different situations against different coverages, guided by a head coach with a genuine offensive mind, and supported by a defense that keeps the team in games even on days when the offense is still finding its rhythm. That combination doesn't happen by accident. It happens when an organization fully commits to a quarterback and builds around him. Cleveland has committed. Let's address the Super Bowl conversation directly, because it deserves a real answer rather than either breathless confidence or the kind of careful hedging designed to protect against being wrong. The honest version is this: nothing in the NFL is guaranteed. Injuries derail promising seasons without warning. A difficult 3-game stretch in October can unravel a roster's confidence in ways that were impossible to predict in May. The league's unpredictability is not a caveat, it's a fundamental structural feature of the competition, and anyone claiming absolute certainty about January outcomes in the spring is working from emotion, not analysis. But here's what's also true. As of right now, Cleveland has assembled something that genuinely, for the first time in a very long time, resembles a complete football team. Not a team with one dominant unit propping up significant weaknesses elsewhere. A complete team. a defensive foundation already proven at the highest level, an offensive line investment that signals long-term commitment to protecting a young quarterback, receiving weapons capable of winning at multiple levels against multiple coverage schemes, a play caller with the offensive intelligence to put his quarterback in advantageous positions week after week, and at the center of it, a young quarterback who has been tested by this offseason in ways that most players at his stage never face, and who responded every single time with the behavior of someone who understands exactly what this opportunity means and what it requires. In the NFL playoffs, the regular season picture gets complicated. Hot teams do things in January that nothing in September suggested was possible. Momentum is real. Belief is real, and a defense that keeps a team competitive in every game it plays has a way of manufacturing playoff relevance, even in weeks when the offense is still working through its growing pains.
Cleveland is not a feel-good underdog story anymore. They are a legitimate threat. The defense keeps them in games. When Shedeur runs this offense effectively, and everything the coaching staff has seen this offseason suggests he is capable of running it effectively, this team has the components to be genuinely dangerous in a way that opposing coordinators cannot simply scheme around. Winning a Super Bowl is not guaranteed. Nothing in football ever is. But for a team that does this correctly, starting in Week 1, with the right quarterback, the right protection, the right weapons, and the right defensive anchor behind them, it is absolutely within the realistic range of outcomes. And every organizational decision Cleveland has made over the last 12 months points directly toward doing this correctly. Here's where everything lands. 3 quarterbacks entered this competition. One was already mentally moved on from by a coaching staff that had resolved his future but couldn't yet say so publicly. One carried an injury history that made the mathematics of building a full season around him impossible to ignore, and has been repositioned into a role that better fits what his body can reliably provide. And one showed up every single day, absorbed every narrative thrown at him, outlasted every challenge placed in his path, and constructed a case so consistent and so undeniable that the coaching staff stopped evaluating it and started trusting it. The competition is over. It didn't end with a press release. It ended in a practice, in a film session, in a conversation between a head coach and a quarterback who kept demonstrating the same thing every time the circumstances made it easy to demonstrate something less. The formal announcement, the public designation, the official title, the moment that makes it real for everyone outside that building is coming. But inside that building, the decision has been settled for weeks. Shedeur Sanders didn't stumble into this. He didn't benefit from a favorable arrangement or inherit a situation that was already resolved in his favor before he ever threw a pass. What he did was quieter than that, and harder than that, and ultimately more convincing than that. He argued the only point that matters to a coaching staff evaluating a quarterback under real pressure. I can be trusted. And in a league where trust between a quarterback and a coaching staff is the foundation that everything else is built upon, that argument, delivered consistently, professionally, and without noise across an entire offseason, is the one that wins. The era hasn't been announced, but it has already started, and everyone who has been watching closely already knows it.